All right, and this is a special segment that we've put together for you on the eve of Modi's second year in office. As his government turns two, we've decided to put the spotlight on the economy. What are the hits and the misses? Has the economy turned the corner? Are those long-awaited Achhe finally here? And we're joined by an expert panel representing the political class, MJ Akbar, Manish Tiwari and Pawan Verma. And the economist on our show, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, joins us right here on India Tonight as well. Thank you very much, each one of you, for being with us. And Mr. Akbar, because you represent the Treasury benches, I must ask you the very difficult question. Of all the poll promises that you made, job creation perhaps won you the largest number of votes. Has lack of job creation really been your biggest challenge in all these years, at least 2 years?
It is indeed the one of the main challenges, but the most important aspect about job creation is, I can only quote from the Prime Minister, it's an aspect that has been missed because many of the things that are being done by Prime Minister Narendra Modi are really very, very, very radical. And one of the themes of job creation is, he has said over and over and again, he said that he would really want Indians, and Indians at all levels, in fact going down very much to the base, to be job creators rather than job seekers. And that within that sentence lies the whole essence of the scheme known as Mudra. Mudra is the scheme through which, for the very first time, the poor people who do what were known as micro businesses, people who do individual businesses, say in villages, people who do goat farming, people who do chicken farming, people who are barbers, people who are vegetable vendors. I mean, they seem very small businesses, but they too are businesses. And these businesses have never been allowed to enter the fiscal economy, as it were. And for the first time, loans without collateral are being offered to these people, to those who need it most. And the growth is being empowered from below. In Mudra alone, nearly 3.5 crore people have been recipients of Mudra in the first year, and that scheme is really being doubled in the second year. So that's one of the major aspects. Even, if you take a small micro business and assume that 1 or 2 more jobs have been created, this is all in the informal sector, outside the statistical sector.
Right. Hold your thoughts and let me get in the Congress view before I throw to Dr. Rajiv Kumar. Manish Tiwari, comment on that. BJP says that it started the process of job creation and it wants to, enable job creators and not job seekers. Is there an argument that impresses you? Does that cut ice with you?
Well, that's chicanery for the lack of a better word. The fact is that in the past 2 years, the BJP government has been able to achieve the singularly impossible. That is that they have sunk and shrunk the Indian economy. The fact remains that today, if you look at any sector, whether it is real estate, whether it is agriculture, whether it is industry, even the services sector, what we've seen is a contraction of the Indian economy, and therefore this explanation which is being trotted out, that stand up India, start up India, sit down India, wake up India, and God alone knows how many other India programs these guys seems to have conceptualized in their head, eventually they add to zilch. You see, there is a structure of the economy, and that structure of the economy is agriculture, industry, manufacturing and services, and all the 3 sectors have contracted.
Okay, let's keep the politics out of it just for a moment and let me get in the economist here, Dr. Rajiv Kumar. I'm sure you will also agree that while the government has got a lot of things right, its biggest failure, so to say, would be the fact that it hasn't been able to kickstart growth, kickstart the investment cycle, and as a result, it's not been able to create jobs, and that's a politically sensitive matter as well. Would you concede that that's probably the biggest failure of this government so far, the fact that job creation has just not happened?
Before talking about the failure of the government on a day like this, when it seems this government has control over the markets and also over global investment banks, for them to time their positive announcement just right, I think we should give them credit at least for that. I mean, you know, if they can pull that off, I think it's a government that is probably on the ball. You know, jobs don't get generated, around the corner or overnight. And I think there's a lot that has been done by this government, which is work in progress. And I think if 50% of those start bearing fruit in the next couple of years, in the next year or so, this government would be, sitting quite pretty. And, I think their timing and their timelines are much more aligned to the next political cycle. And I see a job pickup and an investment pickup beginning in the second half of this year, which I think is also in some sense reflected by what Morgan Stanley has done. So rather than crib about the fact that the jobs have not been created, which they have not been created because exports are down, investment is not up, IIP is not doing very well, so clearly the jobs have not generated. But I think the government has taken cognizance of it, and I think you will see the beginning of a recovery in jobs creation starting the second half of this year.
All right, let me just get a neutral political view on this. And Mr. Verma, if I may throw this question to you. The government has been high on big ideas. I mean, look at the kind of sloganeering that is happening in Delhi. But will you nail the problem to perhaps lack of follow-up, implementation, the execution on the ground for some really good ideas?
No, I hesitate to ascribe malafide. But I do believe that in the case of the ideation, the slogans, the promises, and the actual follow-up in terms of delivery, few governments have betrayed a greater breach of trust. Do you know, travel across India and you talk to farmers, and they repeat the same thing, that they gave up the idea of a minimum support price, which is 50% over cost of inputs. They completely reneged on it and coming to power. The entire youth of India was seduced by the promise of 2 crore jobs. And of course, there is the possibility of an unfavorable international economic environment in terms of some form of recession. But also they have had favorable factors, such as the low prices of crude. But in the manufacturing and export sectors, to have only 43,000 jobs created is the worst performance in 6 years. Surely, apart from the GST bill, there are 100 other things that could have been done in the economy to improve a sense of both achievement and confidence.
Now that you've spoken about the GST, it's best that we speak about that elephant in the room, and Manish Tiwari, because you are the principal opposition on that one reform, and I know you're a candid man. As someone who claims themselves to be original architects of game-changing legislation, what explains your very staunch opposition to the GST, and especially given the fact that there are factions within your party that believe that the GST should be passed? I mean, there can't be pole positions on a legislation of this kind, can there?
Well, Supriya, since you prefaced your question with the compliment of candor, then allow me to be as candid as possible. I've never ever believed that the goods and services tax is the panacea for all of India's economic problems. Yes, it may be a reform which needs to be carried out, but would it really bump up the Indian economy by 1 or 2 percentage points, as the finance minister and other ministers of this government keep on articulating? I'm afraid that's really not the case, because if the intent was, and we've had this argument earlier, that you want to create a common Indian market, then why do you leave petrol and petroleum products out of it? Why do you leave alcohol out of it, or excise products out of it? So therefore, then this whole business of a thin list, where you can add any product that you like, in addition to, of course, the objections which the Congress has raised with regard to the rate being put into into the constitutional amendment mechanism itself, are issues which need to be thought through. So therefore, if there is any give or take, the give or take has to be done by the government. You can't have a situation whereby the same ministers who function as the principal hatchet men of the government are the same guys who expect the opposition then to cooperate with them. You know, on one hand you try and coerce and intimidate, on the other hand you expect the opposition to roll over and play dead. Well, that's not happening. So therefore, if there has to be an outreach, the outreach has to be from ministers of this government who should be willing to walk the extra mile and see where a common ground or a modus vivendi can be found.
Mr. Akbar, comment on that. What's the way forward on the GST? You heard that, comment from Manish Tiwari, the Congress, and that's what they've been saying, that your government hasn't reached out enough. You haven't walked the extra mile. It's a reform that's been in the making for over a decade now. Surely, it's time for this grandstanding, so to say, to end. Can the government not reach out more to ensure that the GST amendment bill gets passed, at least in the monsoon session of Parliament?
There is no way any government is going to permit, or can, if a government is responsible, can permit GST to have a constitutional amendment as one of the criteria. Look, leave aside anything else. Can you as an Indian citizen envisage something of this sort? Where an executive decision, a financial, fiscal executive decision, an economic decision shall now be trapped into a constitutional amendment, and you know what that means? If that is the kind of demand that the Congress is going to put up, by the way, a thought which never occurred to the Congress when it was pushing for GST and when Congress was in power, and I do think it would be perhaps irresponsible to accept that kind of demand on any other thing. On figures, I think the finance minister said already want 1% more of this or that or the other. All of that can be discussed and should be discussed. We are a democracy. There will be people with opposing views or different views. Obviously, we should be discussed. But you will see how parties, for example, like Mamata Banerjee. Mamata Banerjee is not very kind to the BJP. I'm sure you know that. But she has said that she's willing to support the GST. Other parties in the middle have said they're willing to support GST as it has been proffered and has been articulated by the government.
Dr. Rajiv Kumar, this has become a political hot potato, isn't it? And the economy that's suffering, because probably, and you'd agree, you've been one of the big champions of GST as well. We've talked about it for months and years at end now. When is this deadlock going to break? What is it going to take for this deadlock to be broken? You'd agree that some of the objections raised by the Congress were valid, were economically sound, and they've also been looked into by the government in power as well. What is it going to take for this deadlock to be broken?
Well, it will take two things in my view. One which has already been mentioned, but in too much of a candid terms, and which is that the BJP will have to learn to play coalition politics. The days when a party in power could steamroll its own agenda are long past. I mean, this is too diverse a country and too heterogeneous a polity for that to happen. And now that the Congress has been diminished in the Raj Sabha, I think there is far more space to exercise that, and the BJP should learn to reach out to the other parties which will, I think, support the GST, and the Congress can therefore in some sense be shown its comeuppance. So that's the first thing, to learn to play the coalition politics despite the fact that you might have a majority in the Lok Sabha, because this country is that of a coalition within and outside the parliament. The second step, actually, as I've been saying, which not most people agree with me, is that just call the Congress party's bluff. If they are saying that we want this to be in the Constitution, that the rate should be mentioned in the Constitution, they're talking about 18%. I can't visualize ever a GST rate which is above 18%. Just call the bluff and then get on with it. And then see when you get the constitutional amendment, if ever 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we will cross that, we'll cross that bridge when it comes. So I think if those two steps are taken, the GST will be passed. And I think GST is critical. And I think the GST is critical not only in economic terms, but also to create a political centripetal force to hold this country together. Because unless you have one market and unless you have a free flow of goods and services in this country, you will never get that feeling of being a nation state and a national economy. I think the BJP should now immediately take those two steps, announce them, and get the GST through as soon as possible, and it can be done.
Fair point indeed. BJP should be calling the Congress's bluff, so let's put the ball back in the Congress party. Manish Tiwari, do you believe your party runs the risk of being isolated, especially given the statements that are coming from people like Mamata Banerjee, who's saying that they will support the GST? And just to take Mr. Akbar's comment forward, she may not be a big fan of the BJP. She's still willing to throw her weight behind this one.
Well, it's not a question of isolation. Ultimately, what position which party takes on the floor of the House, that would only be determined once Parliament convenes. But the fact remains that if at all the government was looking for a compromise, one of the possible compromises, and I just speak for myself, I'm not speaking for the Congress party, is that you can have a floor and a ceiling. So therefore, you have a certain range within which there is flexibility of the tax rate being able to adjust itself. But then, it is for the government to try and articulate it in cogent terms and see whether there is a willingness to buy that argument.
Pawan Verma, what's your sense? Do you believe?
Explain away its economic failures. What can the opposition do about it? If it refuses to summon a structured dialogue, not only during sessions, but between sessions of Parliament, to find a solution to the three sticking points which are entirely capable of resolution, what can the opposition do?
MG Akbar, because this is the economy debate and the economy report card, I cannot let you go without answering the tough questions. What explains the letter that your MP Subramanian Swamy writes against Raghuram Rajan? I mean, RBI is an institution. Let's leave politics aside. Isn't that warranted?
Well, I suppose Dr. Swamy would argue that he has rights to write to his views too. But I think the government position was well explained and articulated by the finance minister. And you have seen what he has said, that the government and the RBI governor share a very mature relationship in which there is a great deal of interaction.
Right. That's a debate in itself. I'm sure Dr. Rajiv Kumar will also agree on that. I'm sure he has a point of view as well. You can come in if you have a point of view on that. But more importantly, Dr. Kumar, I want you to sum it all up. As you look back at 2 years of this government, many would agree there have been many hits. But what, according to you, are the key areas that they need to focus on as far as the economy is concerned over the next 3 to 6 months?
The sort of real weakness of this government has been that it's being seen as a government of incrementalism, of business as usual, which drew the comment from Arun Shori some time ago, that is UPA with the saffron lipstick. There doesn't seem to be anything different that this government is doing. And I know that there can be a lot achieved through incremental measures, and there are 51 schemes that this government has announced. But what this government needs to do in the next 3 months is come up with a bold vision and come up with some measures for structural reforms in critical sectors like agriculture, like exports, like railways, and manufacturing, without which we will not get jobs generated. And I think what the government needs to do and what the Prime Minister should do from the 15th of August, for example, is to announce a target for job creation and then get himself open to being evaluated on that. So what we need from this government is now some boldness, because now that the economy is set to recover and hopefully the private investment will pick up as well, we should give that push, because otherwise this recovery will remain anemic and the private investor will become very skeptical, increasingly skeptical, and the uncertainty that overhangs the economy at this moment will continue to plague the economy. We got to move past that, and the only way you can do it is to take advantage of the good things that are coming your way and get those reforms going, especially because the manna from heaven that came in the form of low petroleum prices is disappearing quite rapidly. So what you would need is real action on the ground to control those, control that, deficits, to get the subsidies in order and get a move on in terms of, better tax collections and better tax mobilization. So I think what we need at the moment is now some very active, policy making, structural reforms, and I think the ball is firmly in the court of the finance minister to be able to deliver that.
Dr. Rajiv Kumar, always a pleasure getting you with that perspective. Pawan Verma, MJ Akbar, Manish Tiwari, thanks so much for joining in as well with with those thoughts on the economy debate right here on India Tonight as we take stock of 2 years of the Modi government. But let's tell you what else has lined up in this power-packed edition of India Tonight in the next 30 minutes. Supriya's got the line.